I remember when we were all reading Adam Smith. There is a book now. I took it all, I took in all the new ideas at one time. Human perfectibility now. But some say history moves in circles, and that may be very well argued. I have argued it myself. The fact is, human reason may carry you a little too far. Over the hedge. In fact, it carried me a good way at one time, but I saw it would not do. I pulled up in time, but not too hard. I have always been in favor of a little theory. We must have thought, else we shall be landed back in the Dark Ages. So that's a word by one of Dostoevsky's models as a novelist and as a psychologist, George Eliot. So she would have had a good classical education, but I think it's very nice the way she contrasts an excess of reason. So we saw that already a couple recordings ago in the Euthyphro, in the example of Euthyphro himself as putting his own father on trial and his excesses of taking the principle of justice to the furthest degree, as contrasted with thought, which is more free. So I think a lot of, we've been getting a lot of detractors, both on Twitter, Facebook, and even on this channel itself to an extent, which have to do apparently with the feeling that the university is being in some way diminished. So people feel that if their alma mater is was handed them, let's say, a note that says they're intelligent, is now to be criticized. It diminishes their own the worth of their own degree and therefore their own self-worth. This happens often with people who, in some way, if you encounter them, you realize right away there's some deficiency in their intellect, but nonetheless they may have spent a great deal of time studying and be cultured, civilized, etc. in other ways. And this is particularly types that don't like criticism of the university. But we have a request to consider Strauss's view of Epicureanism, and I believe we'll have to expatiate somewhat largely, but I believe nonetheless we can suggest, if not make an airtight case, a forensic case, that basically this must prove contradictory, this grasping onto the university and at the same time an embracing of Epicureanism. So sometimes these attacks take the form of often the silliest of attacks on philosophy itself, which is any philosopher you don't like, you say, I can't understand him, and he's not simple and straightforward enough, and therefore it must be bad philosophy, which is just the poorest and worst of all possible. It's the most innocent of accusations. So, I mean, if a grown man were to come before a philosopher and ask in a respectable way, why are there difficulties in philosophy, then that's absolutely a necessary question, and an answer should be made, a serious answer should be made, and it can be, and one should be ready to make that answer. But generally, these are polemical issues. So, for instance, Chomsky is constantly making these derisive remarks about Zizek. Zizek is an obscurantist. He finds Zizek's talk full of mystifications, and sometimes he'll make a remark along a remark which is, I guess, the closest he can get to making a remark which isn't hugely arrogant, which is he'll say something like, they seem to be able to understand themselves when they talk like this. But that's the furthest he goes. Um, on the whole, he acts like it's just uh, some kind of posturing and fake, some kind of power play or something. But Zizek himself uh, announces, "Oh, I produce my philosophy for the idiot, and the idiot is ultimately me, myself." So he pretends as though he's speaking everything so simply that at least he himself, the idiots can understand it. But then at the same time, he's very often making some remarks that almost everyone is too stupid to understand or to be worth talking to. So if we coordinate stupidity and idiocy, um, we might be able to get somewhere in connection to um, this Epicurean cure to philosophy. So everyone, of course, everyone knows the word idiot means something like um, re- retreating into the private life. So remember that Epicurus is about. I mentioned in advance that there's all kinds of accounts of Epicureanism that are readily available, and you can look at those. Um, I try in general not to repeat the most banal and readily available material, and especially in this case where we want to say to some extent how Strauss understands Epicureanism and how he uses Epicureanism rather than just general remarks, but we also have to make some general remarks. Um, if you took up the idiot from the point of view of Avital Ronell or so, then you see the notion of the layman or the idiot as um, this would be the reverse of the university as an authority which is laying down um, a curriculum which one should learn, and then that's it. You're done. So in the same way, Epicureanism and Dugan speaks about stupidity in the same sense. As sometimes you get very interesting forms of stupidity. Breaks. Whether Dugan means by that a break from sanity or not is another question. But it's obvious that when Zizek speaks of himself as an idiot, what he means is these are things he can understand himself. So the claim is truth as veracity. I'm saying things that are more or less simple to myself, but this is one gets in a very isolated position where only a few people like Heidegger or so can really understand what we're talking about. And but that's inevitable with philosophy because that's just the way it is. So one can have a long debate about that, whether the principle that nature is aristocratic is the main factor there, or whether the pain of study is the question as a barrier to learning. Both factors, of course, come in. So if we understand Epicurus as a sort of a quote unquote third way, which is to say, no longer in the strictures of the Platonic Academy or politics, but in his garden, then this is a sort of idiocy in this sense. It's a laymanism. It's not something. It's not a duty. It's not something we're doing for the polis. Um, it's a third position. So this third position has to be clarified. I've taken the advice of doing lower quality video, and this is an experiment. I don't know how long this video will go on. We'll need to have a second video. I want to go into some examples from China And for Strauss, there's a great difference between ancient Epicureanism, which is about superstition, and the modern Epicureanism, which is very complex. And maybe we'll go into the example as we'll try to tie in some of the things they brought in at the beginning. Dostoevsky, um, of Peter Kropotkin and his socialism, which is we can present as a kind of modern Epicureanism, a third way. So, in other words, there's a state of nature, something like that. Whether this is the Rousseauian state or the Hobbesian state was already debated among the followers of Socrates. Aristippus was really the first Epicurean before Epicurus himself. He proposed this to change eudaimonia into simply the principle of hedonism. He created his school, and he left his daughter, who he named Arete, which means excellence or virtue, as his successor. So that should say something about the. It's not as though we were simply giving up the notion of virtue by going over to the principle of pleasure or hedonism, but there's a complex. There's a complex of issues here. So. Are we addressing the issue from the point of view of somebody who's heard the word Epicureanism in the streets, and then we want to know what it's all about, but we already have a notion of it, of course. So, or are we a classicist who wants to say, what is the view of Epicurus as a Greek psychologist dealing with the Greek soul, the tripartite soul, and with the theory of physics? So the answer would be both, but that makes, of course, for a very difficult exposition, and it makes for some apparent unclarity. Again, I'm inclined to say most of the listeners so far have had very little interest in understanding what's said, and the criticism is almost entirely fake criticism, faux criticism, which is simply